anything that can be done behind a computer screen in its entirety is automatable. I think that's very clear. My guess is that 50% of white-collar jobs will be automated within the next 3 years.
What do you think will be the most shocking development in AI for 2026?
Resources and people, it used to be a huge advantage, but I believe now that a team of 100 can do just as much or more than a team of 10,000.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Procurement Magazine podcast. My name is Aaron McMillan, and I'm the editor of Procurement Magazine. I'm joined today by LightSource CEO Spencer Penn for a look back on the impact of AI in procurement over the last 12 months, while casting an eye ahead to what 2026 has in store. There's probably no one better in the industry to have this conversation with than Spencer, who's kind of driven by his commitment to empowering procurement professionals with innovation and his AI native solutions that deliver tangible results. Spencer himself, who we'll introduce formally in a moment, has previously worked for Tesla and Waymo, and last year also released his own manifesto. Spencer, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me. And I'm thrilled to be speaking with you as always. Am I correct in saying that this is the first Procurement Magazine podcast ever?
I believe so. I think we've dabbled with podcasts before in the past, before my time, but this is kind of the first proper one. So we're kind of really excited to get underway. I'm sure, you yourself, I often see you guys hosting your own podcast as well, appearing on your on many others. So kind of interested to see how this goes. And, welcome to give us real-time pointers to see how we can improve.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't be more excited to be here. So let's get into it.
Across the next 40 minutes, Spencer and I will look back at what we predicted 2025 to look like for AI in procurement, what actually unfolded, and what we think the landscape will look like this time next year. My prediction was very wide-reaching, not really kind of putting anything on the line. I was kind of thinking that AI would rapidly expand across all of procurement. So I suppose I can take that as a win. No really kind of specifics in there, but I'm still taking it. We saw all through 2025 kind of drive how procurement teams used AI to drive innovation, which again might be kind of hard to quantify. So from your view, Spencer, if you can cast your mind back almost 13 months when you were looking at the kind of end of 2024 into 2025, what did you think AI was set to have for procurement last year?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a really good question, and I'm always a little bit cautious when trying to predict the future because it's basically a guarantee of being wrong. And anyone who says they really know for sure is probably not being 100% truthful. I think there's two things that I always think about when forecasting, thinking about what's to come. One is, what are the likely technology paths and what will they yield? And then the second thing is the timeline for these things. So very often it's easy to say, okay, in the future, X, Y, Z. But what's a lot more difficult is to understand practically when that's going to happen, right? And so when I started at Waymo, that was back in 2019. And at that time, it was funny. There was a joke from people at the company that full self-driving had been 2 years away for a decade. And so every 2 years it was like, hey, we're updating our expectation because there's such a long tail of things to chase down. Now it's funny, back in even earlier, even in the DARPA Grand Prix days, self-driving cars were able to do an impressive amount of stuff. It gets 90% of the way there, and then it was that last 10% that was really difficult, and then operationalizing that, right? Not just how do we get the car to drive in San Francisco, how do we get the car to drive in San Francisco consistently in all types of weather, in the rain, at night, and then have depots and charging stations and have a rideshare app. And so taking it from, the lab to the street is they're sort of different things. And I often find that it is slower than people think to get basic adoption, and it's faster than people think to get mass adoption. That's typically the way that I think about it. With AI and procurement, gosh, there's like so many things to think about. I think it is inevitable that a very, very large portion of white collar work will be either supplemented or replaced by AI. And the question of whether or not something gets replaced by AI or supplemented by I think falls in there's two questions I have to ask. One is how tech forward and how tech ambitious are the people in the field? And then the second is how much room does that job have for expansion and change? And these two vectors I call tech ambition and role plasticity. And so when I think about tech ambition, if somebody says, hey, look, I'm really excited about AI and I want to use it in my job, I want to be able to do more faster, then what's going to likely happen is that AI will become a tailwind for them. If they say, hey, look, I'm really not interested in AI and I really want to push back on it and I don't want to engage with it, I'm leaning out, not leaning in, then eventually what will happen is that the role will be better done without their presence there. And that's the reality. The second vector that I think about is role plasticity. And so role plasticity is how much can the job itself change? An example of a role that has very low plasticity would be like a toll booth operator. And so if I think about a toll booth operator, maybe let's say that theoretically you meet a toll booth operator that's super into AI and they love AI. It doesn't really matter because that job function is so well defined that even if there's an adoption of AI, they can't modify their role. By comparison, if we think about software engineering, it's a role that has reinvented itself hundreds of times, right? And so when you think about what someone was doing as a software engineer 50 years ago, it was punch cards, it was setting up physical servers, that kind of thing. And then you might look at software engineering and say, oh my God, we're going to replace it with technology. We have cloud, so you don't have to set up your own servers. We have also languages that deal with memory management directly. So you don't need to spend all your time doing that kind of work. And so if you look at the software engineer of 50 years ago, that role has been 95% automated. But that doesn't mean that software engineers are now out of work. It means that they say, now we can assume the server as given by AWS or Google Cloud. Now I have other things that I can focus on and work on. And so they found, I think, in software engineering in general, a really strong growth in terms of the compensation that they've received. Technology has been a tailwind, not a replacement, versus toll booth operator, cashier. These are roles where there's often not a lot of tech ambition, but also the role plasticity is very firm. And so my predictions for, I think I think there's a few different elements of this question. People will ask about what are the areas that AI is going to help automate. And then the simple thing is that anything that can be done behind a computer screen in its entirety is automatable. I think that's very clear. Doing things in the real world is much harder. My guess is that 50% of white collar jobs will be automated within the next 3 years. I know it's a very bold claim, but I think that's actually conservative when I talk to folks who are at OpenAI and Anthropic about the trajectory that the technology is moving in. And then the real metric of like whether or not your job will be automated comes down to, if you can do it from behind a computer screen, if you have a lot of tech ambition, and if your role has the ability to change, right? And so if your job is primarily just, imagine like a very, very transactional kind of buyer where you're placing orders, you're checking invoice receipts, you're reconciling things between systems, that feels very automatable. Now, if you think about someone who's developing a category strategy and then going out to market, building credibility with suppliers to ensure long-term supply continuity, a lot of the things, frankly, in direct materials, I think that kind of stuff is very, very difficult to automate, especially if you find yourself often going into the field. Because, again, LLMs can do a lot on screen, but there isn't today a really easy way to bring that intelligence to the real world. And so if your role involves interacting with people, if your role involves getting out into the public, if it involves going to visit suppliers, I think that you're going to find it very difficult to automate. I don't know if that answers your question, Aaron, but I don't have the predictions that are like AI is going to replace everything, and but I do think that there are certain tides that will just shift over time.
I think it's, really interesting. I think we can definitely see your prediction coming true with more and more advancements in AI. and how it's automating, like you said, the white collar work. So, is that a prediction that you had even before 2025, and it's just something you're kind of holding on to? You said within 3 years, so we've got until the end of this year, end of next year to kind of.
No, that's a very good question. Well, every year I'll push it back by 1 year, but right now, no, that insight that 50% of white collar jobs will be automated within the next 3 years is actually something that I came to over the summer. So about 6 months ago, and that was in a conversation again with I went to a really informative dinner with leaders from OpenAI and Anthropic, and we talk about these topics, right? I mean, I will say that I think that at LightSource we have an unbelievable unfair advantage simply in being in San Francisco at this exact time. Companies that were started 10 years ago could not have taken advantage of the AI revolution because these things were far less prominent, and companies that are not in the Bay Area don't have access to that earliest sort of cauldron of knowledge. And so, it's funny, I've been looking at new office space for our headquarters, and I think we're getting close to finding a space. But as I look at the listings, it's funny, there's this new thing where people are calling one of the neighborhoods the San Francisco AI district, and it's this area called Mission Rock. And so real estate brokers, maybe they're the canaries in the coal mine. They're looking for ways to market certain areas of the city as being where AI is happening. And it's not untrue. I mean, it is a really revolutionary technology. I find myself always amazed by what it's able to do. Like I'll be just using, even just in my own life, I'll be using ChatGPT, and I'll start asking some questions and ask it to do something, and I'm like amazed. I'm still amazed at what it's able to do. I'm always impressed, even though I know it should be able to do this. I'm still impressed by what it's capable of producing. It's just great. But the thing is, like, I do feel that it is going to be like many technologies, not going to be a fair distribution of outcome. The people that benefit most from AI are probably going to be the people who, again, are the ones knowing how to use it, right? If you think about like the things that procurement has experienced over the last year, I think something I didn't predict is how much people have been asking procurement to do more while asking them for reduced headcount. I think that a lot of CPOs, it's funny, a lot of CPOs we meet with, they're not telling me, "Hey, Spencer, we're looking for savings necessarily." What they say is, "We're looking for efficiency." I'm like, "What do you mean by efficiency? Like cost efficiency?" Like, "No, headcount efficiency, because our headcount is being held firm and our business is growing, or our headcount is being reduced and our expectations are staying the same." And so a lot of times what people are looking for are ways to extend their workforce. And I think that AI is actually a phenomenal way to do that. But if you're going to say AI is a force multiplier and not a people replacer, then it has to be that the people know how to work the knobs, right?
Yeah, certainly. You're just not going to get anywhere with the tools unless teams and people are given the proper training and can
Yeah.
understand how to harness it best for the work that they do day in, day out. And, I think it's really interesting on those go out on San Francisco. I was there for the first time kind of late last year, and it does feel so unique as a city to, anywhere
Mm.
in the States. I don't think you can ever really get over it the first time you see like a Waymo car
Oh
with
yeah.
disc
Did you drive in
going
one?
around on the roof, and you're like, "What is that?" And you ask like a local, and they explain it, you think, My God, like that was just something I would never see or expect to see in my life, and to see it like that. So, for someone like LightSource who, are at the very cutting edge of AI, San Francisco, obviously it benefits you, but you can't help that. So you just gotta take advantage of it. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
You could become like the capital building of the AI district.
It's really science fiction. I mean, Waymo's amazing. I mean, I think what's been shocking to people is that the growth of Waymo in San Francisco versus even folks like Lyft. I mean, this was a post in the I don't know if I'm able to share my screen, but let me try. This was the chart of the estimated market share of gross bookings of the different San Francisco operators of rideshare. And so you have Waymo, which is down here, Uber, which is up here, and Lyft. And so, of course, Uber is still the dominant player. It's an enormous business that's been entrenched for a decade plus. But I was shocked to discover that Waymo had in just a few short years um, overtaken Lyft. And it's going to continue to go in this direction. It's almost like feels like an inevitability. And I think that's just the power of technology. Like sometimes technologies are so good that what they call in the legal world res ipsa, which means uh, it's evidence that is so clear that it's self-evident, doesn't even require the attorney to explain it. It's clear to me that cars will be self-driving by and large, especially for the rideshare use case. Now, the hard question is how long does it take before driving your own vehicle becomes illegal?
Mm.
Because eventually that'll become the case too. And it will start out sort of like it'll be like this. If you get into a car accident and it turns out that you were driving yourself and you weren't letting the computer's guidance system manage it for you, you're liable. It would be like being drunk. If you get into an accident and you're found out to be drunk in the United States, it doesn't matter whose fault it is, it's your fault. If it turns out that you are self-driving when you had an autonomy system that you disabled, it's going to be your fault if there's any accident. And then eventually it'll go even farther. It will be, hey, it's just not legal. Just like how it's not legal to ride a horse on the highway. There was a period of time where cars and horses coexisted, but that time is no more. And so there will come a time, and I think it will be probably 30 years away, maybe more, where you can't really use a manual car, like a self-driven car on public roads because of the sort of disproportionate risk it poses to people when autonomous vehicles are 100% safe. And I think eventually we'll see the same thing across a lot of different industries, right? You might look at it and say, how could you ever have a human doing invoice reconciliation? It's so prone to error when the system itself is provably perfect or near perfect, that kind of thing. So I think that then I'm an optimist. I think people often ask, well, what am I going to do? I mean, societally, like my hope is that we can find ways to free people from the work that they don't like to do and help them find things that they do like to do. And if we're really creating we're creating wealth for people through automation, making sure that we just distribute it in an appropriate way and folks are made whole, right? If we're going to say, hey, we're going to gain this efficiency, but I think that my hope is that we're heading toward a more utopian society in 5-10 years.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope so. I think it was interesting the graph you showed between Lyft and Waymo and their kind of intersection. Do you think that's almost what's going to happen with kind of procurement technology? Because I imagine I could be wrong, but when Waymo first launched and people, the members of the public could use it, I imagine a lot of people booked one because it was like, this is new. It's almost I don't mean to use this word disrespectfully, but like a gimmick, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
self-driving. Let's give it a go, and kind of the more it's used and the more positive experience people have, they tell their friends and their friends tell their friends. And, it has that steady rise in which it now has kind of overtaken Lyft. Is it a case that, when people can harness AI solutions, to start with, it's maybe seen as, oh, we can get the tools to do this. But, once people kind of see actual tangible benefits, that will rise and kind of be human-led applications will kind of form or will have those intersections again.
Yeah, I think that like as you can imagine, things will happen faster where people have agency, and so I have choice about whether I want to take Uber, Lyft, or Waymo, and so I can make that switch in one day. And in fact, in San Francisco, I made the decision recently to start using Tesla Robotaxi because, well, one, it's clearly subsidized. There's no way it's like $3, $5 for that kind of ride. Um, but it's a beta program, and I'm an ex-Tesla employee also, so I was curious to try it out. And I was really impressed. And so now I've already switched off of Waymo to Tesla Robotaxi. So the switching cost is very low. And so in applications where people can make the shifts quickly, I think you're going to see things will happen faster. In enterprises, they're a lot slower to change their tools. I mean, I think every company that I've met with over the last decade has either been about to start, is in the middle of, or is still struggling with finishing an ERP transformation from a certain three-letter company. And so sometimes these things just take a really long time. And I think that the organizations where they have the right incentives in place for the executives and the employees make really good decisions, but companies are not so they're very complex organizations, right? They're complex beings. Everyone's got both what's best for the company and what's best for me and my role, right? And I think those kinds of conflicts, when they come into conflict, they lead to the wrong technology outcomes. I have this other philosophy that I've shared, and I actually, it's sort of funny as we're talking. I pulled up a talk that I gave at ISM last year as part of trying to answer the questions. I wasn't prepared for your question, Aaron. You asked me what were my predictions last year, and I was thinking, okay, let me just look at the predictions and see if how many of these came true. The first one was AI won't take your job. Someone who knows how to use it will. That is still the case. I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying. Someone who is able to use AI, who is very serious about it, uh, is going to find a lot of benefit. And I talk about an intro to AI, and then agentic, which was at that time very, very new. And what is the difference between Gen AI and agentic AI? Well, Gen AI, it's reactive. You do a prompt input and then it generates an output. Agentic is you put a prompt input and you get actions as your output. So it's deciding, it's doing things, it's perceiving. Now, LLMs are like a very common foundation for both generating text, pictures, code, music, and generating actions when they're in a framework that requests actions. Now, the questions of where those things live, I think that the philosophy is still the same. I guess the question is just where have they found real practice? And I think that so far there's been this idea, and this is what I wanted to really show you. And what I call the AI capability overhang. And so this is the ability of AI technologies, and this is over time. And what I found is that AI progress as a technology, at least over the last year at that point, had made a lot of progress, and then AI products themselves were very disappointing. And I think that this leads to a lot of confusion because people will say, okay, I can do this in ChatGPT. Why can't we do this at scale in our enterprise procurement solution? And then they'll try to get some kind of AI solution, and then they'll find that it sort of overpromises, underdelivers. Now, the fear that I have is that in a year, and I've felt this shift a little bit in a small way, people feeling concerned that AI has overpromised and underdelivered. And now they'll look at it and say, okay, AI is a false promise. And I think agentic has been one of the biggest, I don't want to say it's been an overpromise because it's like one of these things where there are good actors and there are bad actors, right? Like when I go to conferences, 100% of vendors talk about in their booth, on their panels, AI and agentic AI for procurement.
I was going to ask you about this later on. I was going to bring up the fact, every time we speak, you discuss your problem with this term AI native. I want you to kind of continue, but also I was wondering if you could tell us, how do we hold this to account this year? How does 2026 be that people can kind of can kind of hit back at someone who says they're AI native and be like, well, prove it then.
I think that the easiest thing is to see it in practice, right? I think that is the if you want to test someone's metal, I'm from New York. I grew up in New York. We're from what we call the show me culture, and so I want to just see it. And it's very easy for someone to put together a presentation or a deck, or to talk a really big game. And then the hard thing is, and it's even easy to do like a one-off demo. What's really hard is when you're like, hey, I don't want you to be able to prepare. I want to just give you my data right now, and I want to see what your system is capable of doing. And I think that's where a lot of tools sort of flounder. And I think I've been sort of surprised. There have been even companies that have come out, like there was a company that announced this big, like 50 agent like blitz. They were just like, we're releasing 50 something different agents that do all sorts of different things. It's a great marketing picture, but then none of them were functionally good. And then people are just really struggle to like, it's like, and the problem is if you like say we're going to do this and then it's like not working well, then people are going to say, okay, let's put pause on implementing technology in our business for like 2 years because we had such a bad experience. So the first to market people really do have a lot of responsibility to determine what's the perception for a much longer period of time.
And you obviously pulled up the presentation you did at kind of the start of 2025. You mentioned about the whole generative versus agentic, because it kind of felt towards the end of 24 and kind of coming into 25, kind of agentic started to pick up, but mostly kind of 2024, you were hearing a lot about, generative AI, Gen AI. And obviously, like last year, Garner said it kind of ended to the kind of trough of disillusionment. Why did you think that Gen AI kind of ended up going that way?
Well, I don't think that Gen AI is in the trough of disillusionment. I think that the difference between Gen AI and Agentic AI is that Gen AI is reactive. And so you input a prompt and you output, and what the system outputs is a generative output. And that generative output could be music, code, whatever it might be. And so what Gen AI requires is that the user understand their use case and that they go and they seek it out, right? I have to input a prompt in order for the system to do something for me. With an agentic system, what you're saying is, I want the user to input a prompt, and this could be a prompt that happens at the time of design. It doesn't have to be the individual user. And the output is going to be actions, like an RPA, but on steroids. That's the best way to think about it. So I think that in organizations where they're very tech forward and like high likelihood of adopting technology, what we see is that you can just tell because people will in their own work be using ChatGPT. They'll be using it to like write emails, to run analysis, to help them brainstorm on strategy. If they are using it in their own life, I think it's very likely they bring it into their business. But then at the system level, I think agentic is the place where you really see a lot of, I would say, like workflow type value. I wouldn't say we're in a trough of disillusionment. I would say that I think that's the fear that we're headed towards, is that people overpromise, underdeliver, and then in 12 months from now, people look at it and say, okay, we have to stop focusing on AI. We have to focus on our core business problems. And the reason that I feel that this could come, especially now, is because when I have a conversation with a chief procurement officer or a VP at any of the Fortune 500 global 2000 businesses we meet with, they will often say, we have our CEO is tasking us with developing an AI strategy. And so what do you guys offer in terms of AI? And I say, well, it depends. Like, what do you guys need solved, right? And they're like, we don't really know. And so that's actually like a big disconnect, because technology looking for a problem like is never yields strong results. It always has to start with, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and let's work backwards to find the right technology. The point of buying an AI solution or implementing AI is not just so you can say we have AI. It's to try to solve a real business problem. And so I think people have gotten away a little bit from the question of, hey, what are the actual objectives we're trying to achieve? And then thinking about AI as one of many tools that they can use to solve it. Right. And now sometimes AI is not the right answer. If I think about payment systems, I honestly just don't want AI or generative anything near them, because you know what? A payment system is a deterministic system. I don't want there to be agents. I don't want there to be a literal agency. No decision making should happen by the system. That routing number, that bank account number gets sent that amount of money. It's ironclad. So I think that actually it's not a blunt force instrument that people should be using all over the place. But I think it's a tough thing. I mean, what we have is that there are boards of directors who say AI is important. I have to ask our CEO, what's your AI strategy? They then go to their VPs and lieutenants and they say, what are you doing with AI today? And then they don't have really good answers for it. So they're going and meeting vendors and they're asking, well, what do you do with AI that maybe we can plug into our environment? But that's actually the reverse of how it's supposed to be. You don't go to the doctor and say, like, tell me if what medication should I take before they diagnose you with an illness, right? And so I think that's where I start to worry. Okay, if people are buying AI solutions, but they don't have a clear problem in mind yet, then they're not going to see the ROI or outcome they expect. And then eventually what's going to happen is, like many things, they cool off, right? There's a hype cycle. It's very clear. There's a step change in technology. People are surprised by how performant it is. There's a ton of hype built around it. Everyone wants it. They're very disappointed by it doesn't provide. And then there's like a 2 to 10 year winter, right? We saw this with self-driving. We saw this with VR. I mean, VR, if you remember, Oculus Rift was acquired by Facebook. What was it, like 10 years ago? Everyone was super hyped on it. And then it kind of languished with like some niche of gaming. And then now, only now, like sort of you're starting to see like Apple Vision Pro and the Meta Ray-Bans cresting back into the mainstream. But Google Glass was, I remember even when I was in college, Google Glass was already like a thing, you know? I think these things do go in cycles. They really do. And so I think it's inevitable that when there is this much hype, eventually there's going to be disappointment, because I just know that 80% of the vendors out there are not really what they promote themselves as.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk to you about, how do you make this year the year that kind of, AI, delivers on its promises, but is it just more a case of people need to know why they're getting AI involved? Is it just as simple as that? Or do you think that, AI can do a bit more to kind of, sell itself?
Well, I think AI has already sold itself as if AI is a thing, but it sold itself extremely well. I think that what I would advise people is always to start with the problem. What are you trying to get done in your business? What are your major initiatives? And then think about, how do we get it done? And I would always start with like there's 3 steps in the process. One is do it manually, then build a process that people can do it, and then build a process that automates the people from doing it, right? From needing to do it. And so, there's not magic necessarily there. Um, if a person can't do it, AI likely can't do it today. Do you remember the Segway scooter? Do you
Yeah.
remember that, the two-wheeled
Yes.
thing? So this was like the hottest thing back in the early 2000s. Dean came in, invented this thing, and there were all these great tech innovators who invested in it. Steve Jobs and the founder of Sequoia, and folks like John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins. And so everyone said this is going to be replacing walking. It's like the most incredible technology, blah blah blah. And it comes out and it's like a $4,000 self-balancing scooter, and people thought it was very cool, but nobody suffers from that. Very few people suffered from whatever non-existent pain point they were solving enough to justify buying it for themselves, right? And so, again, I just think that if you start with a cool technology and you don't have a clear problem in mind, then you're going to land yourself in what I would call like tech purgatory. And if you start with a really clear problem and then you find the right technology to solve it, then you will create an immense amount of value. Another example in the cryptocurrency space, what a huge amount of hype cycles that have happened over the years. People are always asking the question, man, what can we do with blockchain? What can we do with crypto? It's such a cool technology. Maybe we can put it into trading cards, or we can put it into NFTs. We can put it into, maybe your milk on your shelf will tell you how cold or warm it was based on like a fully authenticated blockchain temperature sensor. You know what I mean? There's a million things that people try to do with blockchain. But when I think about it, what's the best use case for blockchain? It's currency. It's a distributed transaction ledger. Bitcoin is the best use case of blockchain, in my opinion. And I think that all the other ones have been very difficult to prove out, right? And so I think it always has to start with, and that's a real pain point, right? People in countries with a lot less of a stable currency wanting a store of value that they can transact, not have to deal with their local inflation, be able to send payments agnostic to borders. That is a real set of problems that people face. Actually, ironically, less in the United States. Like we need Bitcoin the least, ironically, of almost any people on Earth, I'd say. Um, but it's a real problem that they're solving, and that's why Bitcoin took fire. And then people started to think, well, what else could we do with blockchain? And the answer so far has been like very little, I think.
I mean, what's it like leading a company like LightSource in a time such as this, where technology is evolving at such a kind of rapid speed? I mean, obviously, nothing as cool as the Segway scooter, but
Yeah.
really exciting time, and I'm sure this 2026 will be kind of more of the same.
Yeah. It is interesting. It is a very fun time to be a company at our scale. There is I feel like so lucky because, if I were to sort of design like my dream company, right? to plop onto the earth in 2026, it would be something like LightSource. I'd be like, all right, I want to bring together a really talent dense, not super small, but a moderately sized but high growth team with a huge amount of talent density, focusing on an enormously commercially relevant problem, which for the most part has been direct materials, which is I would say the big unsung hero of the procurement universe that we have addressed very directly head on, like the elephant in the room that makes up 80% of spend that nobody seems to be looking at. I would also love if, it'd be amazing, is if every single competitor that was built 20 years ago, their technology became irrelevant in like a matter of 2 years. Well, that would be amazing too. And that's what, the AI revolution is, that things that were developed 10 years ago look ancient by comparison to today's standards. The advantage that the incumbents have is sort of three things. One, they have an already built up technology base, which is becoming dated. They have resources and they have a lot of people, and they have a reputation. And so resources and people, it used to be a huge advantage, but I believe now that a team of 100 can do just as much or more than a team of 10,000 if they're really given a unified direction that they're all rowing towards, and they have the kinds of AI tools that they need to extend their capabilities. And then the final thing is that AI has been a huge tailwind for us as a business, not just in our product, not just in the way that we work internally, but also externally. If you talk to any CPO today, they're being tasked to bring AI into their environment, and the answer they can't come back with is, "Hey, we're doing something more with the legacy provider," because it's clear that that's not the innovative solution. And so, folks are interested more than ever in meeting, Silicon Valley based high growth companies because they know that there's something there, right? And so I feel very excited about the place that we're in, and I'm very, very excited about the time in the world that we happen to exist in. But the thing that makes it hard is that the world is changing so quickly. I, as a leader, need to stay extremely close to the latest developments. I've not found myself needing to read research papers at any point in my career since I left grad school until now to really understand what's happening in the space. I also find myself using AI tools all over the place. Like I want to use Replit, I want to use Figma, I want to use Claude Code, because these things there are other people who are right now grappling, very smart people in our 1 mile radius of us, who are grappling with the question of how can we make use of this incredible technology suite. And it's interesting to see the ideas that they've brought to their product and what are the ones that we can borrow or exceed, or things that would work better actually in the context of procurement than coding. Now, the challenge for our team is that this means that we have a very clear North Star, but navigation that is changing every month, right? And so that's always the balance. Is it's like playing a game of soccer. You tell the team, hey, here's where the goal is, but then when the ball gets on the field, we have to be able to move around, run slightly different plays, and be agile. And I think that's the way that it always is for startups, but I feel especially like that now. You have to be prepared to change your strategy.
Yeah, of course. And, I think if you want to be successful in the AI space, you have to be ready, and I think your approach is probably the best to have. You're ready and open to listen and learn from other people, and, take advantage of all the tools that you have. Like you said, it's there. I think everyone should be kind of using the tools in their life to their own benefits. I'm also glad that you mentioned kind of direct materials, because obviously earlier this year you debuted your manifesto. That was one of my highlights of 2025, being able to pick up that little book. So, for anyone who perhaps doesn't know, could you give us the Cliff Notes version of what that was, how it came about, and kind of your kind of core message in that?
Yeah, of course. I actually have a copy of it here with.
And of course.
Yeah, of course. And so this is a Spec to Scale manifesto. It is a book that actually we published earlier this year. I am very proud I wrote it myself. And it's all about the history of procurement technology and how we ended up where we are. And really specifically, like the core of the manifesto is this idea that direct materials has been underinvested for decades. And that when we look around at the market environment, the vast majority of solutions are focused on indirect XYZ. And even the construct of S to P source to pay being the canonical tech landscape for procurement, ends with P2P, which is the procure to pay system, which is indirect, not the ERP. And so there's an entirely different set of technology solutions that you actually need that bear very, very scarce resemblance to the indirect world when you really start to think from a first principles basis about what those teams need when you're thinking about direct materials. And it's about pulling from the engineering systems, PLMs, aligning on something we call specs or specifications. Now, this could be CAD drawings or it could be CAST numbers for a chemicals business, and then running through the full supply lifecycle management, eventually to payment, and then even post-payment managing things like quality and index adjustments and risk, things again that are not very well managed in the P2P systems today, if they're touched at all. And so we really wrote the Spec to Scale manifesto as a way, it's sort of broken into two parts. One is looking back and the other is looking forward. And how did we end up in this position? What's the history of procurement technology that we ended up in this sort of weird local minimum? And then a philosophy about Spec to Scale, which is what is the ideal set of processes? Forget about the technology, but what are the actual things and activities that people are doing, indirect materials that are orphaned today? And then thinking about, okay, what is the most ideal solution? And we try to build LightSource in that vision to check all of those boxes so it fits like a glove for direct materials teams. And of course, there's a little plug for us at the end, but I really believe that this is I think it's a great read. It's really fun. It's actually well-informed, very honest. I'm pulling no punches. It's a little bit controversial at certain points. And we, as you know, DPW it felt like the manifesto city over there was just like plastered with our messaging. So it was just really fun. And I'm going to try to get a hardcover version published. Right now it's all soft cover. So.
No, I think it's great, and perhaps unfairly, procurement gets labeled with this whole boring tag and what. So it's good to have a voice like yourself who's not afraid to throw some punches and stir things up a little bit. So I'm sure it will be seen at kind of events across 2026, and we'll hopefully see that kind of hardcover edition come. And I know I'll certainly pre-order one if they're available to buy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, kind of looking back at the last 12 months, one thing I seem to see, and it could just be a nature of my job, is there was a lot of acquisitions, larger companies buying up startups, buying up smaller companies who perhaps come to market with an interesting kind of AI tool, and they've kind of acquired it to kind of boost their own AI capabilities. From your kind of CEO perspective, what is the thinking behind that? Why a larger company would perhaps swallow up those startups who come to market with an interesting AI tool, rather than look to either build on it, build their own, improve it? Why is that a case that if you're a CEO, what do you think the kind of thinking is behind a move like that?
Like a CEO at a company or at another
Yeah,
tech.
obviously you yourself is. I was wondering if you could just give us your perspective as you obviously are LightSource CEO. Perhaps you think
Mhm.
differently to myself. I just wanted to know what is the thinking behind it, or you're more than kind of welcome to answer it as yourself, Spencer.
I mean, are you talking from the perspective of someone who's like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company? Or are you asking for like the CEO of SAP, for example?
Yeah, from a procurement company, a procurement technology company who will, look to acquire a startup who have come to market with an interesting AI tool rather than kind of use it as inspiration. Do you think it's just a case of they've got people in the door already who know how to make these tools? Let's get them in, or is it just a case of
So people will acquire companies for, one of three reasons. One is they acquire the customers. Like if you think about something like, you know, I don't want to say any specific companies, but let's just say, I don't know. Let's think about like, Certuo as an example. I think that there's a way to look at that acquisition, which is, hey, they're going to buy the product, and they'll enhance their platform. There's another way to think about it, which is they'll buy the product and then they'll cross sell the broader Coupa suite to existing Certuo customers. And that might be the place where more of the value is. The third reason for acquisition is to acquire talent. They call this acqui-hire. I am of the belief personally, and for reference for anyone who's listening, LightSource is absolutely 0% for sale. We are eventually going to be on an acquisition hunt, but not for anything in particular. But we're not building ourselves as an acquisition target. I mean, we've grown so quickly. We're so lucky to be backed by incredible investors, and so we're the opposite of in need for cash. But I think that if you build a company with the intention of being acquired, I think it will never happen, because you will make short-term bets that don't have long-term value. And you also will typically have like an acquirer in mind, and you don't actually know if their timing lines up with your timing. You can't control them. And then you also don't have a lot of leverage. For me, what my dream is for our company is to build the definitive procurement operating system for direct materials and to bring that company public. And I believe that that company could be as large, if not larger, than a business like a Salesforce, which is a $250 billion business. Now, when I think about like acquisitions in general, like, when I think about, we've had actually two opportunities to acquire other businesses, and one of them we considered, and one of them we really didn't. But it's funny, like in both instances, when I talked to our CTO and said, "Hey, they have this product, we can acquire it," his view was, well, actually, it's more work than it would be for us to build it from the ground up. So someone has to have really, really impressive technology in order for it to be something that you want to acquire, because chances are it's built in a different code base, it's built in their own languages, it's not connected through to your systems. We know certain companies in the procurement space have been built up through acquisition, and they'll wrap the business with like a label that it's an all-in-one integrated solution. But then when you get behind the nuts and bolts of it, it's like you have to click a button and enter effectively a completely different environment in order to use these other functionalities. And so it ends up being a very disjointed situation. If somebody were to have a piece of IP that's like pharmaceuticals, right? Like where it's like, hey, we don't actually care anything about the operations. We just know that the molecule is patented. We can make it, and it's been tried. It's a much more clear acquisition. But if we were to buy a company, it would really be either one of two things, like buying their revenue, like, hey, they already have $10 million of ARR, and that can accelerate us, and we can cross-sell to their companies, like LightSource instances, to grow that. Or maybe they have some really core kernel technology that we absolutely need, but that almost never happens. Or we really like the team and we can hire them, but that would be too expensive to buy a company for. So that's why acqui-hires tend to be when companies are like really not doing well, right? So if you think about like another Coupa acquisition, I won't say the name, but they made an acquisition recently where it was clear that the company was just stagnant, and they probably bought it for pennies in the dollar, and they were able to say, hey, we made an acquisition, maybe we get some customers, but more importantly, we get to acquire the team and like bring on like a few really great people onto our organization. And is it worth spending $10 million for that? Like, probably. I think especially now when like you can build software so much faster using AI, I think it's becoming less and less important to be able to acquire pre-written software. Like, I think even in 10 years, I think people will look at coding interfaces and be like, how did we ever write code by hand? Like right now you write code, like a lot of people are writing code with English, so.
Thank you so much. I was kind of really interested to kind of get a look at it from the other side. I feel like so much we just report on, company X has bought company Y, and, it's nice to kind of look behind and, kind of see what drives people to purchase. I also didn't know, and there was a case that it isn't just a kind of plug and play kind of thing that, you acquire one company and, you lift up their resources, their programs, their tools, their solutions, and, you can't just embed it into yours. It's obviously a much more difficult process, and, it all depends on how the solution was kind of built and whatnot. So thank you so much, Spencer. So looking ahead now, obviously we're 12 days into 2026, second full week back for a lot of people. You know, from your perspective, what do you think this year has in store for AI and procurement? Do you kind of see agentic continuing to kind of its dominance of the space, LLMs coming back to the forefront? I'd love to get kind of your thoughts on
Yeah.
what we're shaping up for.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that last year was the year of experimentation, and I think that this year is the year of implementation. So last year, a lot of companies were doing experimentation, trying to understand the landscape and trying to build proofs of concept. And I think that this year will be a year where companies are actually starting to really incorporate AI and agentic systems into their long-term digital roadmap. I do think that there is a risk of course, of like people being disappointed at a certain moment, but I don't think that's going to happen this year. I think that could happen in 2 to 3 years from now. Like anything with this much hype, it's just very hard to match it. And by the way, if everyone was LightSource customers, I think they would not have that risk. It's that I know that there's 80% of the companies out there just are not going to be able to deliver on the kinds of promises that they've made. And if that's the case, then I know the conversations in 2 years, people are going to say, hey, Spencer, like this sounds really great, but we ran a pilot with XYZ and it didn't really work so well. So we don't really have the appetite to try something again. And then I'm going to be in the position where I have to convince them, hey, look, like I know that you ran a pilot with those guys they're not technologists, right? They're not Silicon Valley based. I think the other thing you could do, honestly, just like look at the CTO of the company. If you look at the CTO of the company or you look at the engineering team on LinkedIn, I would stalk them, not like in a creepy way, just like look through the LinkedIn of the company. If the people in the team are all coming from like Waymo, Google, Facebook, Meta, Airbnb, Microsoft, high caliber organizations, then chances are that they are going to be able to deliver really impressive AI solutions because they're staying close to the latest technology and they're coming from places where that kind of stuff is developed. Like our CTO, Adan, for example, came from Google X and Google Research, which was the birthplace of the transformer model, which is now the T in ChatGPT. It's like the basis of every LLM is this model called a transformer. And so it's funny, like there are people who are like talking about transformers and he'll sort of like, he'll kind of cringe because it's like, I was in the team that developed this, And so there's just an element of like, being ahead of the curve that I think is involved, if you bring really, really high quality people to the table from these elite institutions and they have access to knowledge early. So I think that it actually is the third canary in the coal mine that you can look at is, who's on the team.
Perfect. Yeah, I think my prediction for this year was kind of similar. I thought more companies will kind of take the plunge and move from pilot to an actual adoption program and actually moving forward to it. So fingers crossed. We always kind of see at the end of at the end of last year there was clarity reports saying people are still stuck in those kind of pilots. So how do you think in 2026, people move away from the pilot program? It feels like we've kind of said it all throughout this last hour that that there seems to be big enterprises kind of in their ways. People are messing around with AI, but they can't get their pilot program off the ground. They can't move forward to it. They can't implement the software. And you're worried it's going to lead to those conversations this time next year where people say, you know, there's a fear that people become disillusioned with it. So how does 2026 become the year where procurement teams can, take advantage of this day to day rather than it become this never ending?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Now, I think it depends on who I'm speaking with. So if I'm talking to an individual buyer category manager, I would say make sure that you have access to LLM tools that you can use safely within your organization. At home, use ChatGPT, use Claude, whatever you want. At work, you have really sensitive data. Chances are your IT team, if they're doing their jobs right, will be giving you access to an LLM tool, whether it's Copilot, ChatGPT, or something else. I would say the number one thing you can do as an individual is become like just start using AI in your day-to-day work. Just start using ChatGPT. Become addicted to ChatGPT. Just use it for everything. And then you'll find that you can automate large amounts of your own work and just you can do the work of like 10 people. It's like having an army of AI interns. They're not always right. You have to like sort of curtail them, but it's definitely an accelerant. If you're a CPO or a CEO, then you have to really work to partner with your IT team. I have found by and large that IT teams that have a dedicated procurement and supply chain member, I think serve those customers much, much better. Um, Sometimes IT can be a bit on an island, like a silo away from the business, and then they will be in their own world, creating their own AI digital roadmap strategies that may not be as connected with like the needs of the customer. And the customer here would be like procurement, like the CPO. And so what I would ask if I were a CPO, if I were chief supply chain officer, I would want to have an IT resource that reports to me and dotted lines to the IT, the CIO, because I find that in those organizations, they tend to have much more agility to get tools that they want that actually end up getting used. I think there's a lot of risk alternatively of shelfware. And then what I would do personally is I would really map out like what are my processes and what are the goals that I want to achieve, and then triangulate that against like first start with the nuts and bolts stuff, like the brick and mortar, like blocking and tackling, like what are our workflows, what do we need to do, and then figure out what can be automated, what should be automated, and then go and take a pretty broad perspective on the kinds of companies that I'm willing to chat with about it, you know? And then bring them into the fold. And then I think it's just like this, like conversation, proof of concept, contract. Now, the thing is, you have to be ready to actually contract. Like, I think there's another thing, which is it's very easy to run pilots and proofs of concept and then put things in your wish list and not revisit them for 6 months, but then you will be delaying progress for the business by 6 months to a year by doing that. So really say, hey, we're gonna try something. If we like it and it works, we're gonna buy it and we're gonna implement it. And then of course, like the AI landscape is changing in 2, 3 years, you can always reassess, transition to something else. But I do see a lot of testing in the market right now. And then if I were a CIO, I think that they have a really hard job right now. That's my perception. I think it's really difficult to be an IT leader because everyone's looking at you and saying, we have these digital systems and they're not good. Like, why is ChatGPT so much better than the tools that we're being given? You weren't born today, right? Like it's like the president. You're running the economy that your predecessor designed, right? And so, you have systems and data and you don't want to break the ship while you're captaining it. And so to some degree, you have to maintain the systems that already exist. There are decisions that were made before your time or before AI really existed that you're living with today. Um, but I would be open to new solutions. And I think that a lot of times what it makes sense to do is some of the best companies that we've seen strategically, what they do is they move away from storing data in siloed systems and they move towards storing data in a unified data architecture, like a Snowflake type system. And there's many, many alternatives as well. But if you store all of your data in a data lake or some kind of really strong data warehousing system, it doesn't really matter at some level which point solutions you're using. Those are just business logic and they're drawing from and repopulating like a unified data system. And I think that's much better, to be honest, and much more flexible than having, all of your data, like having like 20 this set of data in tables in SAP. This set of data is in tables in Coupa. This set of data is in tables in LightSource. This set of data is in our PLM. If every system is just instructed, push it to a unified data layer. And by the way, this is not a procurement data layer. This is a data layer that exists across the full organization, including HR, including sales and service, etc. Just different data tables. Then I think that you'll have a much more unified system, and then your switching cost is also much lower as new utilities come up. I'm trying to think about a good example. It'd be like, it's like, I don't know, like it's like replacing your computer, but then keeping your electrical system in your house the same. You plug in a new computer, it's okay. You can upgrade your computer without changing the wiring in your house. But really smart IT teams like think this way and they develop things this way, and then some are really behind the ball and frankly got swayed by sales folks at some point to do the wrong thing and get locked in with a vendor, and they're spending millions and millions of dollars on technology that's shelfware, and that happens all the time too. Businesses are imperfect. Great people also make bad decisions sometimes. It just happens. I do all the time. So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. Yeah, you can kind of get stuck in those loops, and you kind of help. We've all been kind of seduced by a salesman before, believing the product we're about to buy is going to change our lives, and unfortunately, it doesn't. So, I'm going to round things off now with kind of the last question, almost like looking for something controversial for you to finish on. What do you think will be the most shocking development in AI for 2026?
I have one take that I think is going to happen this year, and I don't know if maybe it'll be 13 months away. Who knows? But here's my prediction: is that I think in the next year we're going to see a one-person unicorn, and what I mean by that is a unicorn is uh, a a unicorn in Silicon Valley is a company that is valued at $1 billion, and I believe that within the next year there's going to be some kind of news story about a company that is valued at $1 billion, where they do an expose and they discover that it's actually just one person, one guy or one gal in their garage running with like 15 computers. Each one is just kind of doing a business function. They have a sales and SDR agent system. They have a account executive agent system. They have a payment processing agent. They have, a software development team that's all being run through Claude Code with a separate agent that's like reviewing the code. And it's going to be like one person just really good at using and orchestrating AI tools that builds like $1 billion company. And then I think it's going to be I think the floodgates will be open. I think it'll be a hard world for venture capital at that point too. But that's my prediction. If I had to just like choose one man unicorn.
I mean, that would be absolutely incredible. Is this you kind of secretly revealing what you're doing in your off time?
No, but I do use these tools. We're unfortunately way past the point of being a one person band, and we've been a two person band, me and my co-founder, since the very beginning. So that has unfortunately that moment has passed for us. But on my nights and weekends, I do build stuff, and I even created this site. I was sort of interested in seeing if I can actually use these tools, right? I want to make sure that I'm staying close to the technology. So I created this app called Job Source. It's basically an application that I built using AI, and the tool itself uses AI to help you find procurement jobs. And so it's procurement career intelligence. You click find a job, and it goes out into the world and it pulls a bunch of stuff, salary data, career portals, etc., and constructs for you an environment where it shows you all of the possible procurement jobs that are available on Earth. You can filter by locations and skills, and we have an AI matchmaker where you can put in your profile, LinkedIn profile, and it will match you with the best jobs. You don't have to search on your own.
Like Tinder
Um,
procurement.
yeah, like exactly, like Tinder for procurement. And then you can form things like wish lists and send these to yourself, and you can view the jobs and see what they include. And
I don't know if you have access to the information, but do you know if anyone has gotten a procurement job because of this tool?
It's interesting. I just launched this like a month ago, and this is an example of a side project. Nobody really from LightSource was involved in it, other than the fact that there's a link to LightSource, a banner ad at the top. And I'm also interested in the stats, how many jobs, what's the density of job locations that are being captured here? What are the top hiring locations, the top hiring companies? ABB apparently has like a ton of procurement jobs open right now. The seniority levels, job postings over time, you can see that weekends are a very unpopular time to post jobs.
Mm.
So, and then LightSource skill is preferred for all of them. But that's just cheeky. That's my own thing. So, and the point of this is not, I think there's two things. One, it's like, of course, if you're looking for a new job in procurement, where do you go? There's thousands of websites. It's all pulled together here for you using AI. But the second thing is that I myself, as a CEO, don't have time to develop other companies in my free time. In fact, I'm 300,000% of my time is committed to LightSource,
Right.
more than I could ever dedicate. But it's still important for me as a leader to stay really close to AI tools. And so I built this using code generation platforms. I was really playing around with a bunch of them. I wanted to figure out, can I do the work that would have otherwise taken some team of engineers a week to put together and do it? And can I do it over Thanksgiving in like a day off? And that's what I did. And so I think it's really important for leaders to stay really close to this themselves. Like, if you want to have, it always comes from the top. If you're experimenting and you're staying close to the technology, you can enforce that on your team and you can inspire them. And if you're not staying close to it, then it's very hard to know what's happening. The art of the possible is like, will be out of your reach.
I think that's a great place to leave it, Spencer. Honestly, I could chat with you all day, but sadly, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate the time.
And thank you all for listening to the Procurement Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe on whatever platform you get your podcast from, so you can know the moment we have another episode for you. Until then, bye for now.